Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a 7-game Major League Baseball slate. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe buttons? That really does help the channel. I do appreciate it a lot. We have a very interesting slate today because our pitching is going to be pretty expensive, but we do have some good bats. We have some value, but the sub $3,000 value is non-existent today, so do keep that in mind. But we are able to build pretty reasonable lineups with the way the pitching is priced today. So let's go ahead and get into this slate. It's a pretty interesting one. We do have a couple games that could be high scoring with the Colorado game in Cleveland. They absolutely scored a ton of runs yesterday. We did fantastic in fantasy yesterday as well. We got a lot of the home runs in the slate, and we put a lot of really good lineups together today. So hopefully, or yesterday. So hopefully we can do that again today. We've been pretty good so far this season, uh, getting the right guys, but it is a process here. So let's go ahead and get into this slate here. We have some interesting pitching situations, but for the best pitcher overall today is Gill for the Yankees. He's been absolutely phenomenal so far this year. As you can see, he started the season a little bit rough, but his last 5 games, he's been absolutely fantastic. He's a little pricey considering the fact that he doesn't have as high of a ceiling as some of the other guys, but he's got the best K rate on this slate, and he's had 5 straight quality starts. The upside here and a plus matchup against the Angels is really solid, so I think he's a good play on the slate, and he's probably one of the best plays on the slate overall. But we do have a few other guys that we also like today. Mbanga for the Cubs. Now he is facing Milwaukee, which is a tough matchup. I don't think his ceiling is as high today as it's been in some games, but he has done well against good teams this year as well, so I don't think he has a super low floor either. I think he'll get 15 plus fantasy points at the minimum. It's just a matter if he's going to get 15 or 25 or 30. But I do think he gets somewhere between 15 and 25 today. So he's a good play, but he's kind of risky, especially because he's a pricier option. So he's a GPP play on the slate. Lugo for Kansas City has a very good matchup here against Minnesota. He's been very good so far this season, has a high ceiling. His floor is also similar to Mbanga's. He doesn't have a super low floor, though he's had that a couple games. Uh, I do think he's a good option here. Minnesota does tend to strike out a lot, but I do like a few bats on Minnesota, so he is a GPP play. P play. I do think he ends up giving up a couple earned runs here. Verlander also jumps off the page as a solid play. Now he really did struggle to start the season, and he's had some really bad games. But the last 3 games, he's had 2 over 28 fantasy points. Granted, he had one bad game against Milwaukee and one bad game against the Yankees in the last 4. But I do think he has some upside today, so he's definitely a contrarian option with some upside here. His K rate has been up and down, so that is the concern. But if he can get over 5 strikeouts, I think he can pay off here, as he's got some of the better stuff on this entire slate. I'm also going to mention George Kirby here for Seattle. Now, he's got an absolutely tough matchup against Houston, and he's struggled lately as well. He projects well today, but he has struggled. The K rate has been up and down. He's very concerning, so he's an extreme GPP play. Ober for Minnesota, also an extreme GPP play today, as he has good metrics, but he has also been very inconsistent throughout the season. Kansas City is also a decent team, so he's definitely high risk, high reward. And then Manoah for the Toronto, he's got the best matchup today against the White Sox. In 2 of the 4 games he's pitched so far, he's been okay. He's been solid, but in the other 2 games, he's been absolutely terrible. Oddly enough, the 2 teams that he was terrible against were some of the worst teams in baseball, but he gets another worst team in baseball, so hopefully that trend doesn't continue and he can get over 6 or 7 strikeouts and not give up a bunch of earned runs again. But he's been very inconsistent so far this season for Toronto, so he's an extreme GPP play as well. I do have 2 Hail Mary options for you. They are okay. First, we'll look at Tyler Anderson for the Angels. The thing is, he's got an absolutely tough matchup here against the Yankees, but he's been good in the last 2 games against Houston and Texas, which is our tough teams. His strikeout rate is not super high, but if he limits earned runs, he can pay off here. But he's definitely a high risk, high reward type of situation. And then we're going to look at Schellenbach for the Braves. Now, this is going to be his first major league start. He's a former second-round pick. He's not even been in AAA. He's been in Single A and Double A, but he was absolutely fantastic in those set situations. He hadn't pitched a ton of games in Double A either, but just 2 of them. But he had a 1.8 ERA and a 51 to 10 K to
walk rating in 45 innings. It looks like he's got pretty good stuff. He's also the third best prospect in the Braves organization, so he definitely has some potential today, especially against Washington, who's been up and down so far this season. I do think a couple guys on Washington have some upside, but I do think he's a Hail Mary play there. Tyler Anderson, who I already mentioned him. I'm sorry. So that's what I have for pitching. There's a lot of decent options here. Um, so we got to move into our catchers now. So David Fry is our top overall play on the slate. He looks absolutely fantastic. He's been pretty solid so far in this series against Colorado. He had 33 fantasy points yesterday. I look for him to have another big game here, assuming he draws a start. He's one of my favorite plays on the slate. Bochard for Colorado also jumps off the page as really good home run upside today for the Rockies. Now, he's been inconsistent this season, but the last couple games he's been pretty solid against Cleveland, and he does draw good metrics here at home. The other guys that have super high metrics are William Contreras for Milwaukee, Aaron Judge for the Yankees, and Alvarez for Houston, but they're all super expensive and hard to roster as a result, but they are good at one-off options on your team. So let's look at these catchers, though. Outside of Fry and Contreras, I also like Danny Jansen at $4,900 for Toronto, as he's got good metrics here, and he's a good contrarian option off of Fry. But then also for value play, whoever starts for Atlanta, whether it be Travis d'Arnaud or Sean Murphy, I'm guessing it'll be Sean Murphy again. Now, Murphy has not got a lot of hits yet, but in his first couple of games back from injury, he only played the first game of the season, and then he hadn't played since until a couple games ago. But he does have really good metrics here, and if once he gets going, I think he's going to be a viable option. Not only that, but he's $3,500 right now, so you get to pay cheap here, and you can pay up at other positions. Moving into first base, we have some guys that we definitely like here that are pretty expensive, like Vlad Jr. He jumps off the page as the best overall play at this position, and he's got a very favorable matchup against Flexen, who's absolutely abysmal. I think Toronto is going to be one of the best teams to stack today, outside of that Colorado-Cleveland game at least. But you could also look at Chris Bryant. Now, I don't like using Chris Bryant much. Where'd he go? For Colorado. Now, he can play in the outfield as well, and he's been absolutely abysmal. But the metrics do jump off the page really good today. He has been better at home when it comes to hitting home runs, at least so far this season. So he definitely has that potential. He's a high-risk, high-reward Hail Mary type play, and he's cheap enough that he's definitely worth a look. Matt Olson is also in play for Atlanta. Now, he has struggled this season, but he is really playing better lately, and so I do think he does. I do think he has good matchup metrics here. And then Hunter Goodman, who can play in the outfield as well. He's a good one-off for Colorado as well. I think in a stack of Colorado, he'll fit in, as he's been hitting the ball pretty good in the last 3 or 4 games, and he's cheap, and so he does have good metrics here. You could also consider Josh Naylor, who had an absolutely monster game yesterday for Cleveland as well, especially in a Cleveland stack. He would be somebody to consider, but I do like a lot of guys from Cleveland today, so he's not a must-play. If we're going to look at at the next position, second base, we're going to look at Ozzie Albies first. Now, he's struggled since coming back from his injuries, but he has been hitting the ball very well the last few games. He just needs to get on base and get some doubles and home runs more, but he's definitely a capable option, though he's fairly expensive today. And a good contrarian option off of him is Andres Jimenez for Cleveland. He's been fantastic in this series so far. He had a really solid game yesterday with multi-hit game. He's had some really good multi-hit games lately, and I look for him to get another one today, so he's the same price range. Jose Altuve is kind of a Hail Mary play for Houston. The metrics are there, but he's definitely in a risky situation, as I do like the pitching against him in Kirby as well. And then for a nice value play here is Brendan Rodgers for Colorado. He looks really solid today. He has not hit the ball particularly great all season, but the matchup here is good, and he's got home run potential on this slate, so he's definitely worth a look. Looking at third base, Austin Riley jumps off the page as the best overall play at this position, though he is high risk as he has not played too many games yet since he's been back from injury, but I do think he has some capability today. However, he did strike out a bunch yesterday. Looking at Alex Bregman, he's also in a really tough matchup against Eric Kirby, but he definitely has been okay against him in the past, so he definitely has some matchup metrics in his favor. He's still high risk, high reward, but this position is somewhat difficult today. Gabriel Arias, he does not have home run metrics today, but he does have hitting metrics, and so I do like him for a multi-hit game here. He definitely has some potential as he's a contrarian option with a good value price as well. Chris Morel is a good one-off for the Cubs. I don't love the Cubs today, but he's got some good metrics for this game, and he has some nice home run potential despite the fact they're in a tougher situation. Looking at shortstop, this position is probably pretty weak today. Bobby Witt Jr. definitely is a top option, though. He can definitely hit a home run today, and he's got good metrics for it. Bo Bichette, though, does look really solid for Toronto. I think Toronto is a sneaky stack today. He's been really good the last few games, and he does draw a great upside on the slate. So I do think he's a good play on this one. Nico Horner's a good play for the Cubs. He can also play at second base. I really don't like him all that much. I think his metrics are okay, but it's just a really tough position today. Gilbert Arias, who I just mentioned for Cleveland, can also play at shortstop and fit in there. That position is probably the weakest on this entire slate. Maybe the outfielders, so Fry and Bouchard, who I already mentioned, are the top overall plays at this position. But you could also look at Tyler Freeman for Cleveland. He looked really good yesterday. He ended up going 0 for 5 in a game that his team scored 13 runs. But he's been really good the last few weeks, so I think he's a viable play again today as he's got good metrics. Rodriguez for Seattle. Sorry, not for Seattle. For Cleveland. In the outfield here at $3,200. He's a great value play at this position. He's one of my favorite value plays, in fact. He didn't start yesterday. He only got one at-bat, unfortunately. But I think that if he draws a start today, he'll be somebody I would definitely try to roster, especially at his cheap price. Juan Soto doesn't have the best metrics today, but he definitely has good home run potential anyway. His metrics are not as good as Judge's, who I do like a lot today, but it's kind of wonky because Judge has absolutely just meteoric metrics right now. And so even though Soto does as well, it's a little behind what Judge is at. So then we'll look at Chris Bryant, who can play in the outfield as well. I already mentioned him at first base, but he definitely falls in as a good play. George Springer jumps off the page today. Like I said, Toronto does look really good. He's been absolutely phenomenal in this series against the White Sox. I look for that to continue. Hunter Goodman, who I mentioned at first base, can also play here in the outfield. Then we'll look at Cody Bellinger is a good one-off for the Cubs. I think they're a little bit of a sneakier stack today than they look, even though they even though they don't project all that well. Sean Bouchard here, who I already mentioned, who's a core play for me. Ozuna for the Atlanta Braves. He's been fantastic this season. He has another good matchup metrics, and once he starts hitting the ball well, as he's kind of up and down that way, but he hit a home run yesterday, so he'll probably have a string of games where he hits the ball very well, and I look for him to continue that. And then Davis Schneider here for Toronto. He can play at second base as well, but I think he does fit in the outfield a little bit better if you want to roster him. So let's look at our stacks today. We have a lot of good stacks on this one, even though we have a lot of stacks that aren't that great as well. So it's going to be an interesting slate here. Let me pull this up here. Sorry about that. All right, so we've got Cleveland and Colorado. This game is obviously going to be super potential when it comes to high scoring. And, I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can mix and match this Cleveland lineup. But Fry, Freeman, Jimenez, Rodriguez, and Ramirez. Now, you could swap in Josh Naylor here for Ramirez, but Ramirez has been absolutely phenomenal lately. For Colorado, Bryant, Tovar, Goodman, Rogers, and Bouchard. I really like this stack. I don't typically like Colorado, but they just jump off the page today a lot. And so I think this is going to be another high-scoring game, and both those teams have a lot of potential. The next few teams, they're going to be super hard to roster because they're super expensive. But for the Yankees, Soto, Judge, Volpe, Stanton, and Torres, this is a pretty expensive stack, but it does look really good. This Toronto stack, though, is going to be something I'm going to try to make a couple different different lineups with. Vlad Jr., Springer, Jansen, Bichette, and Schneider looks absolutely fantastic for the Braves. Albies, Riley, and Murphy are going to be the cores. Now, Murphy could be whichever or whoever starts at catcher for the Braves. And then for Albies, Riley, you could either use Olsen, Arcia, or Ozuna and Duvall. I do think Olsen. I think Arcia and Ozuna are probably my favorites pair of those, but you could definitely mix and match those guys. And then these bottom stacks, they all just kind of fit in the same zone where these teams all project to be in around the 3.5 run range. Not a lot to differentiate many of them, so I kind of just threw them all together here. But the Cubs stack is kind of sneaky and interesting here, and they have a lot of guys that project well today. Minnesota always seems to have a few guys that project well, and today's not an exception there. For Washington, this kind of a Hail Mary stack, as I don't know. They have really no matchup metrics against Atlanta's new pitcher, who will have not pitched in even AAA. So I think it's kind of a Hail Mary situation there. The White Sox, I mean, they got a couple guys that project well, but there's not a lot there. For the Angels, this could be a little sneaky, but I don't think it's going to be too much. Kansas City is a little bit pricey, but they do have some guys that have some potential. Milwaukee, the catching position definitely jumps off the page here, but they don't have a lot beyond that. So there's only 4 guys there. And then for Seattle and Houston, these are going to be Hail Mary stacks. Now, Houston's super expensive, but there's just no way around that today. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting.